With Nigerian philosopher, scholar, and academic administrator, renowned for his contribution to African philosophy, socio-political philosophy, ethics, and cultural thought. He's a professor of philosophy at Ladoke Akitola University of Technology, Lautech, Ogbomoso. I've won when I mention Lautech. Please, with the standing applause. I don't need to remind us that Lautech is the biggest university in Nigeria, and the best in Nigeria. And that's why we have this program here. He's a former Vice Chancellor at Dominion University, Ibadan. He's also a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters. Over the course of his distinguished career, he has held several important academic and administrative positions, and presently is the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Lautech. Thank you, sir. His scholarly work is widely recognized for its critical interrogation of fatalistic conceptions of destiny within Yoruba anthology, emphasizing human agency, responsible freedom, and essential truth. His research also engages broader issues related to African identity, ethics, socio-political development, peace, and national cohesion. Professor Ebijuwa is an active voice in academics and national discourse, contributing significantly to intellectual discussions within Nigeria and internationally. Please, with a standing applause to welcome Professor Ebijuwa, ably represented by Mr. Esan David. Welcome, sir.
Neuroscience Harmattan So I have my last one is in the medical school at the university. So since that day I looked and I said, the area we can go to is neuroscience. That's what I want to do. He said, I said, that is what I want to do. Because I actually had a lot of the discussion here. Alright, so the mind, the brain. Sometimes at the end days of philosophy, we interchange the mind and the soul together. And so when you want to look at any philosophers, when they talk about the mind, they fix it up with soul. That is why when you see scholars like Aristotle Plato, they will tell you that the soul. But in the essence of it, they actually want to refer to the mind. But we make them, of course, no. Like I used to say, you can only describe your world with the architecture that is available to you. When you look at the writings of John in the Bible, in Revelation, and he says that he saw a jet that is in his eye, how do we imagine a prophet of the 5th century BC to talk about the fighter jet of 2036 that he saw? So it's only going to picture that I've seen a jet, the fire is falling out, something destructive. And that is why at the end stage of philosophy, there is a fusion between the human mind and the soul. But at the advanced stage, there is a dichotomy between the mind, the soul, and the brain. So at this level, I will go ahead starting from the mind and the brain, leaving the part of the soul, so that I will go to think about metaphysical issues. So it's divided into 6 elements. We have the mind-body problem in a historical perspective, duality, physicality, and embodied cognition, a brain as structurally classified origin and group as neuroscience foundation, implication for Nigerian neuroscience towards a unified theory of the mind, brain, and thought. So the first section of the mind-brain problem in history perspective. Now, the mind-God problem began basically with a man in philosophy called Descartes. He wanted to look out for a solid foundation in philosophy, a foundation that is a little bit mathematical. And so it came up that the mind and the brain, they are two separate entities. The mind is an immaterial entity and a spiritual entity, while the brain is physical and immaterial entity, which is what we call substance dualism, distinguishing the mind as separate completely from the brain. But that ran into trouble very quickly. Because the problem was that how do we manage the mind and the brain? How do they interact? That's what told us that the mind and the brain interact at the center of the human brain in a place called the pineal gland. Scientifically, we got there and asked Mr. Gelbart, this is the pineal gland. Where do they interact? And he gave the problem. Because it will show us or give us an empirical validation about where the mind and brain interact at the center of the brain, which became a serious problem for him. And you discover, like I told you earlier on, Plato talks about the soul being entrapped in the body. Plato was only trying to explain that when you say my mind, sometimes the heart and share, it's my mind. My mind told me this, my mind told me that. Plato came out with an idea of two different words, the word of reality and the word of God. And the second particular word is only a shadow of details in the word of God. So trying to tell us that, so when you say it's my mind, you are only trying to connect with that thing in its perceptual word of your mind that is influencing your bodily decision. And that's why I said there is a word of God, which is basically, here is just a reflection of the things here. So it said, the human soul, you see that I use the word soul, because that's what it is, that it is trapped in the body and only trying to reflect what has occurred here. And you want to believe it, but to some extent, how do we give empirical validations to the occurrence of our mind? So you want to agree with that also to a large extent, that the mind is a little bit after. But just find this distinction. Give our right came on board and told us that you people are just wasting our time with this mind and body distinction. It's like looking for a ghost inside a machine now. A machine is always working. And now that there is a ghost that is allowing the machine to work, that is controlling it, which is called what we call the categorical distinction. Looking for a ghost inside the machine. So it's like there is no distinction between the mind and the brain. There are no distinction. And you see that it shapes future discussion about the mind and body. And you see that subsequent discussion about the mind-brain relationship. The second statement here is, we tell us that the mind is helping grammatically the brain. That when we are talking about the activities of the mind, we are simply referring to the brain and not more. Why the recognize? We tell us that it is your physical attribute that influences the decisions of your brain and not your mental attribute that influences your visual. So it's a current issue in philosophy and Nigeria. Now the second segment is the mind-brain discussion. I'm thinking about substance duality where the mind and body are completely distinct. The mind is immaterial, body is material, and there is a flavor of interaction and of course the giver goes to the machine. While the other aspect is physicalism and functionalism that states that the mind or the activities of the brain are basically triggered by the body. And that happens to be the two basic definitions. we always face problems. We don't look for solutions. But today, as much as possible, I will try not to create problems. A small child. The child starts learning diction based on the things in his environment. What you pronounce, the language you speak. The earlier speaker told us quite a lot about logic, but I'll be deviating a little bit to see another angle to it. She takes logic as the starting point. But in philosophy, we agree that there is always a language of thought. So for me to think there is a language of thought. And it has been proven that even when you are learning, our brain has a way of returning back to our language of thought. If your native language is Yoruba, and they ask you a question, your brain has a way of transmitting it back to Yoruba for you to understand and comprehend. Then you can now return back, which is the language of thought, which means our environment also influences what? Our logic. So we have the embedded, the mind is embedded in a specific social and cultural environment that shapes its operation. Cognitive processes extend beyond the brain into social system. Mind is constituted through active engagement, perception and action are what? Inseparable. We cannot separate the society from the activities of the brain and the activities of what? The mind. Now the third segment is the brain as culturally plastic organism. Now, from our findings, we discovered that the brain is technically in a plastic form that has an ability to expand and contrast. In the sense that the more you utilize your brain, it has the ability, and from our research, external influences have the ability of not just influencing the brain decision, it also has the ability of influencing the shape, the size, and the texture. Because we're going to discover that when you meditate a lot, your precursors of your brain has a way of getting a little bit thicker. So which means that your habit has a way of influencing the shape, the texture of your brain. So, we agree that the brain recognizes itself by forming new neurons connection in response to environment. Cultural practices are among the most powerful and persistent shapers of neural architecture. Long-term meditation, like we said, measurable increase in prefrontal cortex thickness. Bilingual language experience, structural changes in language network, musical training reshapes auditory and motor cortex. Now, these are evidences from research that external output has a way of influencing, of shaping the human brain, not just the cognitive aspect, but the material aspect. And so we cannot take away the influence of the external forces from mental development and brain action. Now, in Nigeria, we have about 200 million. We have about 200 million in terms of our population size. And according to research, 20 to 30% of Nigerians will experience a mental disorder in their lifetime. Of those affected, have access to adequate, 10% only have access to adequate mental health care. We have 4.1 psychiatrists per 1,000 population in Nigeria. We have 350 distinct ethnic groups with unique mental health framework. While most of existing researches are focused on studies that are grounded within the Western framework to be able to explain neurons and how the activities of the brain work. Very little has paid cognizance to how cultural framework influences the neurons and the brain. You would agree with me if you are listening to, if you listen to what is sometimes ago. He said something. can become depressed and you can become happy in it. The Igbo will say that friend is community. African philosophy anticipates neuroscience. The relational self has a very neurobiological correlate. Mirrors neurons built for intersubjectivity. It affirms that our neurons within the collective culture are built on what? Subjectivity, whereby we depend on each other. And that's why when you want to make a decision, you say, what do you have to say? What do you have to say? We are always skeptical sometimes to hear our opinion. Why? Because we say, don't let them say that I am the only one. We don't have this thinking of I am the only one. Don't let them say that I am the one that said it. We will always want to put it in our last, not a philosopher. So our society shows how we think. Even if our brain wants to think individual, to say that go, talk. There is something within your mind that shuts you down. That no, you cannot do it. You can't go that way, which affects them. Alright. Then African personhood, now which is the aspect. There is a little bit of metaphysics to the discussion of relational personhood within what? The African worldview. Whether we believe it or not, whether we believe it or we accept it, there is a little bit of metaphysics. I know quite a lot of you know philosophers, and when they say this person study philosophy, they say the people that don't believe in God, these people don't even know God. But the truth of the matter is, we have more philosophers that believe in the existence of God and metaphysics than those who do not believe in the existence of God and metaphysics. But why our own belief is different is that we question it. So you tell me that a God exists. How do you know? You say it's the one up there. What if the entire creator of the universe is just the two down there and he's looking at all of us and smiling and saying, see all of them. They think that I'm up there and I'm looking at this. Why was our argument about God or cosmology end with God? What if there is a God after a God? That's the questions we ask. So we believe at that level of metaphysics. What if we have 2 or 3 gods and maybe they enter into a contest? So the present God now won the 2 of them, he defeated them, and now it's the only God. What if is the only God now? Because we don't like to go into those areas, but that is the area I love to dwell so much. Because we say, when we want to talk about it, you don't question God, you don't say, how can you say? Then I just ask my friends. I asked them, I said, okay, you said God does not have a beginning, neither does he have an end. If we see God today, does God not know his own beginning? If God does not know his own beginning, that implies that he's not God knowing. Because there is something at least that he does not know, he doesn't know his own beginning. So that means somebody else knows his beginning. That means that person is the one that created the one that you are calling the God. So we look at it. Nature, perhaps. We look at it and we enter into a little bit of metaphysics from this discussion. That personhood within the African worldview is metaphysical, and it is quietly ingrained in our culture. For instance, I'll use the Yoruba because of time. I'll just use the Yoruba. The Yoruba cosmological account believes that our body was brought about. The person who made our body is Obatala. Obatala is the one that made all this thing and everything. So after Obatala makes the body, he keeps it in a place where Olodumare goes there to breathe into it, the breath of life. Although the Yoruba cosmological account is disputed at different point anyway. So Olodumare gives it to it. Then you walk into the house of Ajala, where you go and pick your egg. We call it the destiny. Unfortunately for us, Ajala happens to be a drunkard. So, 80% of the eggs that Ajala gives are bad eggs. They are only blue. Which makes it, and that is why we draw our justification that 20% of the earth placed in the house of Ajala are only. So you can explain why we have many unfortunate persons. So after they beat their head in the house of Ajala, they go to Onibode or where Olumina is present, and they declare everything that they will become in India. They will say, I'm going to become this, I'm going to become that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to marry this kind of person, this is the kind of school I'm going to go, and everything. And after that declaration, it becomes true. And according to the different Yoruba, some will tell you that you touch and it called the tree of forgetfulness. While some will tell you that you cross a river called the river of forgetfulness, and from there you are getting better. And this is an explanation to why you do not remember anything that existed before you were given birth. Now, it is not just founded in Yoruba also, it is founded in Greek philosophy. Because Socrates said that knowledge is reminiscence. That whatever you claim to do, you need before your soul was imprisoned here. And when they are teaching you, they are only trying to bring to your remembrance what has occurred. So the Yoruba will not stand in isolation of that. So we are in within Greek mythology. And so that's why when something is wrong within the Yoruba world, they will tell you to consult Orumila. Why we consult Orumila? It's because it was Orumila that was present at the point of your declaration of what we have. So Orumila will say that this boy said that he was going to go to this thing. This boy is now nonsense. He's going here. The only thing to do is to return him back to this body if he will ever get it right. And so we believe that things like this have a way of influencing our behavior. For instance, if they say that you will become a king, and they say your destiny, you carry a destiny of a king, it has a way of influencing how you are subconsciously. I say, I want to know my job. You might not be able to take some things too serious. And sometimes you might start walking along that line. Normally, maybe if they have not informed you, you will not pay attention to palaces. But now, since they have informed you that your destiny is to become a king, you will start finding out about palace issues affecting how you are and how you behave. So, that metaphysical aspect has a way of affecting how we think. The Igbo believe in the tree. The tree will be your destiny. That's why we say we have the Yoruba, the Igbo. So we use two cultures, Yoruba and Igbo. I'm giving you that of the Yoruba, and I told you it is founded also within the Greek mythology. So we believe that some of these metaphysical happenings has a way of influencing our decisions, how we act. Then Ubuntu is a person to a person, as said earlier. Then I think I've said this earlier. Then Ubuntu is not poetic metaphor, it is biologically encoded in human architecture. What would mean that the relational personhood of the African person affects our biology, affects our brain, affects our mind, affects how we think. There is a particular place. Okay, when I was going for weddings some weeks ago, one of my dad told me, said, Toby, because our state is known to have a little bit of high level of witchcraft. So, my dad called me and said, you are going to go. Ma Baba Mutasi anywhere. Ma Jalibi, Ma Jan anywhere. What is he thinking? He's thinking that be careful how you act. Do you know that this has a way of influencing my behavior? Because when I get there and I drop my even when we are carrying out, sometimes when we are carrying out research within our discourse, at some point, we face some of those things. And we know that they are real. They can affect human action. They can affect how people behave. So, at some point, we encourage that the spiritual dynamism of our culture should also be studied with the biological aspects, so that we can incorporate. Not every diagnosis are just biological. Some will have a little bit of metaphysical inclination with it. So as much as possible, we philosophers, we argue that we cannot do away with this. And as I'll be rounding up education and curriculum. Our educational system basically is tailored towards the colonial legacy, right? So colonial education marginalized indigenous epistemology and language, and that's why you see in modern times today we see people who are asking for indigenous epistemology. There must be a way through which we do things indigenously so that we can be able to get it. I have a colleague who is working on biology as a framework of studying culture. That when we look at a people's culture, a people's survival, we can be able to understand their culture. Alright. So, and that we have given them best instruction when instruction is anchored on familiar cultural practice. Mother tongue instruction in early years is supported by neuroscience. Culturally grounded curriculum is a scientific necessity, not merely cultural sentiment. Not necessarily cultural sentiment. So as much as possible, we encourage research in neuroscience. And presently, me and my boss, Professor Ebijuwa, we are working on neuroscience attributes with Aristotle's philosophy. Trying to see how Aristotle's philosophy has a nexus with neuroscience and see how we can come out with it. So what are the philosophical reflections from this? One, anti-reductionist. Mind is neither reducible to the brain nor separate constituents. Not separate. Constitute mutual dependence, not identity, not independent. So we are arguing that the mind and the brain are interdependent. They are interdependent. We agree that the mind is not a physical entity. For them, it just exists within humanity because we believe that what is real is always an output of what we cannot see. Reality, most times, always comes from what we cannot see. Because there's another lecture that says, even nothing is something. That is what nothing is actually what? Something. And that's why we went back that at least God knows his own origin. Even if you say nobody has created him, he knows how it came. Then culturally embedded. Cultural context is constitutive of cognitive, affective, and neural life, not merely an external variable. We cannot treat culture as an external variable. We must treat it, most especially within the collectivist culture, as what? An internal variable. Because people act according to their culture. If it is very much possible, if you see someone, I was watching a clip about this terrorism stuff some years back. A guy is around 50 years old, he was born in Zamfara State at the epicenter of this crisis. He has never known what is peace. He grew up defending himself, always. Do you know that if that kind of child is inside this hall today, and a bike passed, the guy can pick up a gun, thinking that there is an attack. But because we are not inside, we will nothing in that same way. So culture affects our cognition, and we cannot take it away. Alright. So, and that's why sometimes as you grow and you have kids, you have children, you start having what we call divergent views from your children. Why? Because they are now in a different cultural milieu from what you have. And they are trying to tell you that no, this is how they want to do their thing. Why you are telling them that it is not right in our world, in our culture. And as such, there is a way or pattern of your thinking, there is a way or pattern of your child's thinking, which also affects parent-child relationship. I once asked a question. I asked some children, I said, how many of you do you have your parent as your first confidence? That when something happens to you, it is your father or your mother that is your first confidence that you tell. They have very few things. Why? Because they believe that their parents are not thinking the same way they are thinking. So they cannot understand them properly. They would rather take their friend. They would rather take their friend as their confidant. They would rather take one brother or one sister outside who understand as their confidant. Why? What has happened is this cultural deficiency that allows the coming generation not to see their parents as what? They are confident. So it affects. Then relationality things. Settled and mind are achievement advancement of social interaction, not property of isolated person. In Africa, we are not always isolated. We want people to be there. Then practical oriented guides better research practice, cultural sensitive clinical care, and philosophically grounded educational policy. When we have it within our educational policy, some persons will heal up better in the hospital if they have people around them. People to talk to, they will heal up faster because they will feel more confident. So we are trying to say how this cultural setting around all these things. Then, what is it like to be a Yoruba child navigating family obligations, spiritual practice, and modern schooling? What is it like to be an Igbo elder whose cognitive worldview is organized around Shi and Mundo? This question points to the irreducible cultural character of experience that any adequate theory of mind must take seriously. Mental illness to a very radical church-going person is first spiritual than biological. That person might deteriorate for long if you are not careful in trying to educate that person that the medical aspect does not contradict his religious belief. Are you getting my point? So we must be able to see how we can bridge that gap. Understand people's cultural perspective so that we can prescribe effectively for them. So the conclusion, the human brain is not context neutral. It is shaped by culture across every time state. African philosophical tradition Orichi able to provide profound foundation for culturally sensitive neuroscience. Nigeria over 200 million population, 250 ethnic group, and which multilingual makes it an extraordinary site for this research. You can work so well. We have different languages in Nigeria, and we're able to establish that learning of language has a way of affecting the context and has a way of making the brain work more efficiently. Philosophy is not peripheral to neuroscience. It is a physical, conscience, and conceptual foundation. Nigeria is not only capable of leading this world, the world cannot afford to do without us. On behalf of my principal, Professor Temisanren Ebijuwa, I believe I have not poured you too much. Thank you very much.